Welcome to Must Reads, a series of interviews by authors on their recent books in the field of preaching. We are sponsoring this from the Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence at SMU, and I'm Alice McKenzie. And today, my guest is the Reverend Dr. Donna Giver-Johnston. Dr. Giver-Johnston is a Presbyterian minister. She is the pastor of Community Presbyterian Church of Ben Avon, Pennsylvania. She teaches courses in preaching at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and is the author of several books, including Writing for the Ear, Preaching from the Heart, published by Fortress Press in 2021. Today, our topic is her latest book. You're very prolific, Dr. Giver-Johnston. Your latest book, which is entitled Claiming the Call to Preach, 4 Female Pioneers of Preaching in 19th Century America, published by Oxford University Press in 2021. This book, which is an important contribution to homiletical history, which has not traditionally focused on in-depth studies of women preachers, this book looks at 4 women from the 1800s: Jarena Lee, Frances Willard, Louisa Maria Woolsey, Florence Spearing Randolph, and makes a significant contribution historically. So welcome, Dr. Giver-Johnston.
Thank you. So good to be with you.
Appreciate your being with us. So I noticed very quickly from about the first sentence that this is not just a historical book. This is not just a book about women's call stories from the past, but it's about your call story. So could you tell us a little bit about that 12-year-old girl in Mass?
Sure. I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church. And so when I was 12 years old, I was kneeling in the pew and thought I heard a voice, a call from God to serve in the church. And so my mother marched me to the priest and had me tell the story. And after I was done, he said, well, as a girl, you have 2 options. You can sing in the choir or become a nun. And at that time, I realized that not all boys had cooties. And so I really didn't want to become a nun. And I thought to myself, obviously, Father has never heard me sing. So the way I interpreted that was just that I'd overheard literally the call that was meant for the boy next to me. I just overheard it.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of tucked that away for years and years. And it wasn't until I walked into a Presbyterian church in downtown Washington, D.C., New York Avenue Press, and I saw a woman in the pulpit. And that's when I knew that, oh, okay, I did hear the call correctly. I just hadn't seen a picture of what that looked like.
Right. So that really fits with the women, the accounts of the women in your book, because they have this inner call, but they have resistance in the outer world to it. And then somehow they overcome it. So, so I love the way that you phrase this, that you're trying to restore a narrative of neglect. Or help us overcome the narrative of neglect with regard to these women. Not just historically, though, I noticed in your book, but you've also encountered this in your students and in colleagues today.
Yes, very much so. When I was preaching at Vanderbilt University, I was surprised to hear so many stories of women who had that inner sense of call to preach, and yet whether it was the church or families or whoever was telling them, no, you're not allowed to. And so that's when I began to realize that maybe I could do my dissertation on that. Maybe I could really dive deep into understanding call more fully, and then maybe offer it as a historical resource for others. So that began my journey, and that's what turned into the book.
Right, because I noticed in the book you talked about the contrast between when historically when a man makes public his inner call, there's great rejoicing. By contrast, when women have made their you say this pattern goes deep into American history. When women articulate their inner call, they're like, shh.
Indeed.
Right.
And it becomes painful, like a fire shut up in bones, is how it's been described. That and some women negotiated with their husbands, asking, well, maybe you can answer the call.
Right.
So there's been a lot of different things that women have done to try to avoid the call because it's so countercultural.
Right. Well, I noticed in the book that you talked about how it's inspiring, the calls of these women, but you move a step beyond just let's be inspired to be courageous to talking about some canny strategies that they've used that can be instructive for people today. So what one of them I thought was name it, you name it, right? You call it out.
Mm-hmm. Right. So these four women in the book, they were so different in many ways, but yet they all did three things. They named the issue, that this is an issue that, you know, women are denied their call to preach, in particular themselves. And they also then engaged the question, and that is they used their different rhetoric depending on where they stood. And so for Jarena Lee, hers was an experience, a spiritual experience. And so she used her journal to argue for that. Frances Willard was a public figure who practiced public theology. And so she used her book in order to be able to argue for that. And then Louisa Woosley was the one who basically asked her husband if he could take the call.
And he's like, I'm a farmer. I don't want to.
He's like, I'm a farmer in Kentucky. No way.
Yeah.
And so she was convinced she wasn't allowed until she read the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And then she realized, oh, okay, I am allowed to preach. And then finally, Florence Spearing Randolph was raised in the church. And so she became an ordained minister and used her sermons as a way to argue for not only her ability to preach, but other women as well. And so they use lots of different strategies and what I actually call are tactics, because strategies are something that people in power use, whereas tactics are things that are a little bit more subversive. And that is they kind of re-inhabit the authority that's already there. And that's what was so incredible about these women, which is why I tried to recover not only their story, but their tactics. And so other women and others denied their call today could actually employ them.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this very helpful book, which I find riveting as just as an historical piece, if it were only that. But beyond that, I found it very inspiring as a woman called to preach. I resisted it and found some resistance from beyond, although some encouragement. But to everyone today who is sensing a call and struggling to acknowledge and live out that call, this is wherever we are on our journey. This book is an inspiration. So thank you. And again, it's called Claiming the Call to Preach: 4 Female Pioneers of Preaching in 19th Century America. So thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much.